Morning. We're going live. WACR 90.3 FM radio, the voice of Harlem. Let's go. I got a special guest today, Dr. Andy Kaufman. And I'm excited. It's a beautiful spring day, celebrating 40 years of WACR and 10 years of the People's Herbalist. Nutrition tips, meditation and breathe. Each week a new guest, inspiring finesse. Community focus, we rise together. Stay engaged, oh, yeah. Moves like birds of a feather. Tune in, don't miss it. The vibe is so right. Elevate your game from morning to night. Wellness Wednesdays, turn your mindset around. I love it. On WHCR, hear the truth. Lifestyle, real talk, real vibes. All right. Yes. Welcome to another episode of the People's Healing Hour on WHCR 90.3 FM radio. Man, can you believe it has been 40 years and going that this radio station has been supporting the people and bringing some good information, knowledge, music, and good vibes to y'all. I hope y'all having an incredible morning. I know I am, and I'm honored to be here in celebration of 40 years. You know, we have the opportunity to uplift the spirits and the minds by providing value and information and just good times on a radio show. So I'm really happy to be able today to actually introduce you guys to the folks that have never heard him before. But we've got a special guest, Dr. Andy Kaufman, MD, psychiatry. All right, Dr. Andy Kaufman comes from a strong traditional background. MIT for biology, got an MD from the University of South Carolina, a psychiatric residence at Duke University. So he's really been inside the system at a high level. And he's held academic roles, he's done research, he's even patented a medical device. But along the way, he started questioning what he was seeing. And that led him down a very different path. And now he's focused on education and natural healing and helping people think critically about medicine, viruses, and the bigger issues within our system in general to shape our health. So I am extremely excited to bring on Dr. Andy Kaufman. Can you hear me, Dr. Andy Kaufman?
Yes, it's great to be here with you this morning.
Beautiful to have you. Beautiful to have you. So on WHCR 90.3 FM radio, we normally have different perspectives on health and wellness from the holistic realm to the allopathic system, but you happen to have a very unique experience, and I'm so happy that you're here. But before we start, right, I like to do a little icebreaker. I'm going to give you some rapid fire questions. You just pick this or that, okay? Are you ready for this?
All right. Yeah.
All right. So do you rather sunrise meditation or sunset yoga?
Sunrise meditation.
All right. Cold plunge or infrared sauna?
Infrared sauna.
Fresh juice or herbal tea?
Water.
I love it. For a forest hike or beach walk?
Oh, those are both so good. I can't really choose.
All right, both. I'll take it. Breath work.
Most people don't have access to the beach, so a forest hike is the way to go.
Okay. Breath work session or a sound bath?
Breath work session.
All right. Okay, so yeah, this is the quick, rapid, random wellness questions and preferences. But before we jump right in, man, we have a couple of really awesome connections. I've met Dr. Tom Cowan before. Alex Zek and I are good friends. And you and I met briefly once a couple years ago at the Confluence down at Molly's Ranch in Texas. So I've been inspired by your work for quite a long time. And I'm just happy to have the opportunity to have you on.
Yeah, same here. And that is a great event. And you definitely know my people.
Yeah, Eileen McCusick, she's been trying to get me into sound healing. She told me I should be a practitioner. I've been dabbling a little bit, but I haven't gotten all the way down to get my certification yet.
All right, well, there's still time.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's so many questions, and I'm gonna tell you on the radio show, it's different in podcasts because the time just goes by so fast, and a lot of times we just have some good laughs and we're just learning and having good conversation. But I want to start the conversation off with the phrase "recovering physician." For me, that just it struck a nerve of joy, and I want to know what is your opinion on that because I heard that as a description of your journey.
Yes, well,
In allopathic medicine, when you're a physician, you're expected to follow the standard of care. But at some point, if you're paying attention, and especially if you're open to really reading the research literature, because most doctors are afraid of scientific papers and looking at statistics, and B, they're so busy they don't have time to really understand what's going on. But they know they have to follow the standard of care. In fact, if they don't, malpractice could result, and that's something that doctors are definitely afraid of. But once you see what's going on, when you carefully observe the outcomes of your patients, when you read the research literature and really understand it, all the way from the basic science level up to clinical research, at some point you're going to realize that the standard of care is not for the patient's benefit. It's more of a business model, and you're a cog in the wheel of this machine, and that's what I feel that I've recovered from.
I see that. I see that. The cog in the machine, man. That's an interesting perspective because most people are doing this on a day to day basis. And you had that wake up call and say, "Yeah, you're not going to participate in that." And so many individuals have fall victim to not knowing and just kind of going with the status quo, rolling through and getting rolled over in many instances. So I love that, and I love that perspective. From your time going through medical school and practicing psychiatry, I'm sure you've had stories for days, but what were some of the biggest gaps that you noticed in how we approach mental health today?
well,
I think there are so many. One thing is that most uh, people who have some kind of mental or psychiatric problem and seek medical help, they don't actually go to psychiatrists. They go to primary care doctors, right? Like their internist, their family medicine doctor. And those doctors have almost no to absolutely none in terms of training on how to address that. So they don't have interview skills. They don't know how to do a suicide risk assessment, like basic things. But essentially, what they're doing is just prescribing. And since I was in forensic psychiatry, one of the things that I did was get cases where there was a huge pile of records, including medical records. So I have looked through thousands and thousands of pages of medical records related to psychiatric outcomes that were in litigation. And through all that experience, the generally what happens is someone goes to the doctor, they say, "Doc, I'm depressed." Then the doc writes down patient reports depression, and then the doctor says, "Do you have any thoughts about suicide?" And they say either yes or no. If they say yes, they probably end up going to the emergency department. If they say no, then they get a prescription. So the entire medical record would be such as this: patient reports depression, no suicidal thoughts, diagnosis depression, plan, prescribe, antidepressant A, B, or C. And there's no other inquiry that goes on. And in truth, people have complicated situations in their lives that cause distress, and they need perhaps some support, a way to help generate insight as to what's causing those problems. They need to address those issues And those are the outcomes that you can look at. So if there's distress in a marital relationship, then the goal would be to alleviate the distress in the relationship and improve the relationship or separate the relationship, right? Some kind of definitive outcome that would address the circumstances in the individual's life. But there's not even a discussion or a question about these things. They just go completely bypassed. And thus the opportunity for any real healing or resolution is not there, right? They're just basically people experiencing symptoms. In allopathic medicine, they believe that these symptoms are driven by a biological or a physical problem, like a lack of a neurotransmitter or a genetic mutation or something like that. But there's no evidence of any of those things, and of course, they're now wasting the opportunity to actually intervene and help someone resolve their issues.
Wow, that's powerful, and it actually really strikes some emotion in me because I know so many people, and a lot of people reach out to me dealing with different mental health issues and obviously the severity of them because they don't either trust or have insurances to go and speak with a psychologist, psychiatrist, or therapist in any manner. And recently, someone had called me and set up a consultation because, on the peoplesherbalist.com, we do wellness consultations for people just so they can have some direction on what to do. If it be, some herbs that they can incorporate, or if they do need to go and speak with somebody, we can kind of guide them in the right direction. But there was a woman who had a son who was schizophrenic, and she was going through the same situation as you had listed. Like, she just kind of went to a primary. They didn't give anything really efficient for him, and just different medications, and it wasn't really working out for her. So it's just a very powerful fact to know from inside the system you can see these problems, and then I'm outside the system looking and experiencing those and seeing those same things go happen on a day-to-day basis in respect to the everyday people. And that's the goal here, and the People's Healing Hour, to represent the voices of the people. This is a Harlem-based radio station. It's WACR 90.3 FM, celebrating 40 years of supporting the people. And a quick history lesson, Dr. Kaufman. This radio station has been here for actually 40 years, and I'm honored to be a part of that legacy, because it's important to connect directly to the people of New York, to people in Harlem in particular, and give them some resources and tips and ideas. So everybody that's listening, and all the loyal listeners of the WHCR 90.3 FM, I have to tell you, thank you for your consistency and your loyalty. And we are doing a fundraiser, which will be April 30th, International Jazz Day, here on the campus of City College at Aaron Hall, which is a great hall here. But we're having an April 30th International Jazz Day. Dr. Kaufman, you like jazz?
I am a huge jazz fan, actually, and I grew up in Staten Island, and I've been to
Many of the famous jazz clubs in New York, and once upon a time I had some ambition to play the saxophone.
Oh, okay. I knew you was musically inclined. I could tell. I could tell. There's always a vibe. But man, one of the other topics, because I'm telling you, this time is gonna go by so fast. I gotta jump into them because we could probably talk forever. But here's a big one, and I want your perspective on this because living out here, obviously, it's officially 6 years since the shutdowns and all that craziness from the COVID era, and I don't like to beat dead horses, but I will never forget the nonsense that they tried to perpetuate, or I should say, they successfully perpetuated on our society from the fear-based marketing and the hypnotism and all of the crazy stuff that they told us would happen if we did not comply with certain procedures. By the way, this is a safe space. We can't say the word vaccine on this radio show. We don't have any corporate sponsors. We're not sponsored by Pfizer. We are supported by the people, directly for the people. But I think one of the biggest things that I saw, because I'm a herbalist, right? And I was providing herbs to people during this time and seeing how well they were helping those in their elder years with chronic health issues, et cetera, et cetera. But the biggest, I think, pathogen was fear and how fear impacts our physiology. And your perspective, I definitely got to get your 2 cents on this topic because you have this experience of the brain and the mind and how it works. Is my intuition of how fear can be pathogenic, is this valid?
Well, absolutely, in many ways, and I think a primary example there is to look at what's called the nocebo effect. I think people are mostly familiar with a placebo, which is commonly thought of as like a sugar pill, where in a clinical study, for example, because it's not considered ethical to use this, as a actual treatment. But in clinical studies, right, they give the drug to one group, and then they give a pill that resembles the drug, but it contains no active ingredients to the other group. And you can see that in every clinical study, there is an improvement that comes just from the placebo, and it's based on the belief. So they believe they're getting a powerful, substance that can improve certain things, and then that's actually realized. And the reason they do this in clinical studies is because they want to see what is the effect of the actual drug that acts, has a physiological response from the body versus separating out that belief. But on the other hand, if someone believes something is harmful, right, which is a type of fear. So during COVID, people were afraid of getting COVID, for example. That can have powerful effects and can result in illness. So I'll give you an example of one or two studies done to demonstrate this nocebo effect. One was with a group of cancer patients, and they were told they were given chemotherapy. And I think most people are afraid of chemotherapy because they know it's going to make you throw up, it may make you lose your hair and cause other untoward side effects. And so these people were just given saline, but told it was chemo. So this fear or nocebo effect caused them not only to have nausea and vomiting, but some of them actually did lose their hair just from salt water. There are other studies looking at colds and flu where they give patients, who are healthy people, just saline nasal spray that's sterile, and they develop cold symptoms. So this is a very powerful psychological or psychosomatic phenomenon that can produce a lot of problems. Now, we didn't even talk about how fear can be used to manipulate behavior, but that's also the case. And both of those phenomena occurred, to a high degree with a high prevalence during the COVID era.
Yeah, absolutely. Is when it comes to controlling the behavior of the people, I think it was rolled out masterfully but evilly at the same, like the same time.
Yes, I agree.
It
And
was
that
masterclass.
it's
Yeah.
well documented.
In the UK government and the Canadian government that they actually hired psychologists to develop these tactics to help improve the compliance with COVID lockdown measures, masking, and other things. And fear was one of the major tools that they used to get people to go along. But they had other psychological stimuli, such as changing the rules frequently or making it so the rules don't make sense. So in other words, when the people can't distinguish between what's true and what's not true, they tend to just follow along. So you remember the policy that restaurants had where you would have to wear a mask when you entered the restaurant and as you were being seated, but once your food was served, you were allowed to take the mask off. Now, of course, if masks worked, which they don't, this would not make sense because you would then, as soon as you took it off and started eating, you could spread around germs. But people accepted this and went along with it because they were in a state of demoralization, not being able to distinguish what's real and what's not real. And they just end up following the rules like an automaton and say, I want to go out to a restaurant, so I'm just going to do this. Or I want to go out, so I'm going to, just roll up my sleeve and roll the dice with a vaccine because it's hampering my ability to travel or go to nightclubs or whatever it is. And many people told me about actually doing this because they were so desperate and confused.
Maximum sophisticated confusion. That was a term that I heard from Kevin Jenkins, a good friend of mine that I met during these times as well. And my personal experience, I remember being downtown and I had to use the bathroom, and a restaurant wouldn't let me in because I didn't have a mask and I didn't have my vaccine card. And I'm like, well, you want me to pee on the side of your building? Because that's what's going to happen. And they had, they was like, oh, no, I'm sorry, we can't. And then another group of people came and they kind of gave them the same spiel. And I just walked right past them and went to the bathroom. I'm not going to be indecent because you guys are not making sense logically and not even understanding what you're telling me that I can and cannot do. Y'all, it was a time where people had no idea what they were doing, following orders that made no sense to them, and they were just walking through the process. And I think that was definitely purposeful to, break people down psychologically. Like if you're not thinking, you're just following the orders, and if they're too confusing, you're just going to shut down and be that cog in the wheel, but on the evil side. And that was definitely happening too much, too often. But the one of the bigger things that I noticed was it seemed like hypnosis. I'm sure you are familiar with hypnosis, but have you done hypnosis before? Can you explain how hypnosis works?
Uh, Basically, I'm not a hypnotist, but I actually did some collaboration with a hypnotist out on the West Coast to analyze some of this. But essentially, what it is a form of mind control. So it puts you into a state of suggestibility. And this is actually also what television does, because there are different brainwave patterns that we can monitor through an EEG, right, an electroencephalogram. That's the test that they do in hospitals for seizures and other things where they put electrodes on the scalp. And in different states of arousal, for example, there are different frequencies of those brain waves. For example, if you're in prayer or meditation, you might be in theta waves. And if you're in alpha waves, that is when you're open to receiving information. And this is important for learning, for example, that you want to be in an alpha brain state when you're learning. But an alpha state also can be used for hypnosis and for implanting ideas into your mind, like suggestibility. And this is why if you go to see, for example, a hypnocomic, right, and they find some people are very susceptible to going into a hypnotic state, about 20% of the population, generally speaking. About 60% is variable in terms of their ability to be hypnotized, and 20% are very resistant to hypnosis. In fact, I'm one of those people.
Me too.
To go to a hypnotist and be hypnotized in the past and was never able to. And so what can happen is that people can be put in this state through media. And then whatever information comes or whatever suggestion, they take that in and follow it very seriously. So the research that I looked at was a video that was prepared for the Los Angeles School District for the students who were returning after the lockdown. So if you remember, everything was locked down in the spring of 2020, and then in the fall of 21, or maybe it was 22, they were allowing the students to go back to school. And they had this video to prepare them, and it was talking about complying with COVID measures, and it essentially equated it to loving your parents. So that if you love your parents, you'll follow these rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you're slighting your own parents. And that was the hypnotic message that was programmed into this video that all of the returning students in the entire district were supposed to view before coming back to school.
Put the onus on you. If you want to protect your parents, you must comply. That is, if you love them.
The specific message.
Yeah, that's insanity. But we endured that and more, and still, actually. I feel like we have, well, there's always been a large population of people that are hypochondriacs. I know people that were, always afraid of sickness, and they're always getting sick from something, right? Creating that symptom in their mind. Kind of like you mentioned, the placebo effect or the nocebo effect with the chemotherapy experiment. That, to me, is one of the most mind blowing things. Uh, just for the listeners, if y'all didn't hear that story, Dr. Kaufman went through a study that was showing how you can give people saline placebo and tell them that is chemotherapy, and then in their mind expecting the negative effects of that chemotherapy, and then those negative effects actually occur, like nausea, vomiting, and even hair falling out. Imagine you took a sugar pill and your hair fell out simply because you believed it so. That to me is very scary, but also very, very promising at the same time, because you flip the coin, there's magic that can be happening when you are positively looking into the future with expectations of good things happening. And I do want to circle back on that point, because it is a really powerful tool that everybody can incorporate, and it costs you nothing. And I understand, like, the power of the mind is something that seems woo woo, is something that seems overstated. After the book The Secret and all of these gurus that talk about this, kind of beat it like a dead horse, but this is true scientific. And the truth is, the placebo is the constant. The placebo is the constant measured in the gold standard of data collection and research. And the fact that we don't look at this gold standard, non negotiable piece of reality and try to expound on that, I think is a crime against humanity. And I don't know how much research is being poured into how do we develop and make the placebo effect, the positive placebo effect, stronger in people. But it doesn't seem to be a point of emphasis anywhere with any research, unless I'm mistaken. Do you know any research that tries to expound on the placebo effect?
Well, I mean, there definitely is substantial research on it, but you're correct. No one is trying to optimize it for people's benefit. They instead are trying to optimize it for commercial benefits. So, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, they've done a lot of research to see how they can amplify the placebo effect with their pharmaceutical product. So they've learned that if they make a pill, that it's less of a placebo effect than a capsule. If the pill is colored, it has more of a placebo effect than if it's white. If it has a brand name on it, it has more of a placebo effect than not having a brand name. If it's handed to you by someone wearing a white coat that amplifies the placebo effect. So they're essentially using the placebo effect to, hide or really of actual benefit from the drug, but increase the belief in the recipient that it will be beneficial, and that makes them more likely to take it and keep buying it. So it's very good for their business model. But they're not doing research, how can we use the placebo effect so that people can, psychologically and spiritually improve their health. There's very little done in that respect.
I see. And honestly, that makes sense. They want to maximize profits and utilize the placebo effect to generate more sales for their medications. Ingenious again, of course. WACR 90.3 FM radio, the voice of Harlem, celebrated 40 years of being on the radio and bringing some amazing guests and knowledge and information and even music directly to your airways in the Harlem area and beyond, now that we stream on YouTube and uh, sometimes on Instagram. But this is a beautiful conversation. I'm here just to reintroduce my guest, Dr. Andy Kaufman, ND. All right, don't get it twisted, y'all. Respect the authority. This man has degrees from MIT, he has degrees from Duke, and a very unique and powerful perspective that he's sharing here on the People's Healing Hour. So you guys can soak this in and, be uh, uh, better prepared to endure what is happening on a day-to-day basis. Every day, in every way, someone is trying to control and manipulate you through the media to do something, in most cases, because it seems, I don't know if anybody else watches TV or listens to the radio, you're probably going to hear something that is sponsored by Pfizer or some type of medication or pharmaceutical interests will be in control over ads that go to us. But, understanding our susceptibility as individuals, and then also having a glimpse beneath or behind the curtain to see what they're trying to do to us is very important. And Dr. Andy Kaufman is here to talk about some of these things. And right now, I want to move the needle over, because this is a topic that I know we could probably talk for 2 hours on. But the terrain theory, the toxins, and the environmental influence, right? The difficulty, like, this is one of the biggest issues I've seen right now, and I still have to admit, Dr. Kaufman, I have some cognitive dissonance when it comes to the ideology that viruses do not exist and they are not pathogenic. This is a big topic, hot topic, and it takes people, we got to give breadcrumbs for people to understand this. And this is what I'm trying to do, have this conversation so people can understand that viruses are not the cause of illness. Can you break some of this down for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing is, generally speaking, in mainstream medicine, they don't really talk a lot about the cause of disease because they don't know what causes diseases. But there is one culprit that they often name when they don't know the cause of a disease, and it's a virus. So even, for example, with type 1 diabetes, I think the leading hypothesis is that it's caused by a virus attacking the pancreas in children, but there's no evidence of that. When I was working in the hospitals during my training, and a patient came in with, symptoms that were not quite the exact standard symptoms that were known. They were slightly different. The doctors would always say, well, it's probably a virus. But they had no evidence to back any of that up. It was just like a term that was, we don't know what's going on, so we'll just call it this. And if you asked your doctor, if you went to any doctor, in any hospital, any clinic, any office, and asked them, hey, do you know how they discover viruses? they'll have no idea. And if you ask them how germs are shown to cause disease, most doctors will know, Koch's postulates, which is a set of common sense criteria to show that a germ or causes a disease, which is, you just have to find the germ in people with the disease. You have to be able to take it out and show that it's there. And then if you put it in a healthy animal or human, it would manifest the same disease. And we're taught in medical school that this has been done for all these illnesses caused by viruses. But we never look at the experiments. We never read the papers. We're just told essentially which virus causes which disease, and if there's any treatment for any of them, we're told about that. But never look at the actual experiments and what's being done. But during COVID, I actually started to look at the experiments. And what I found is that they're not scientific experiments. They violate the rules of logic and use things like circular reasoning. So in other words, they assume there's a virus present and causing it in their experiment, but they never actually show it or demonstrate it in any way. So if you look at the experiments done to isolate viruses or to determine their genetic sequence, and these are the main studies that are done, you won't actually find a virus in any of these experiments. All you'll find is an assumption that a virus is present, and then you'll find, either small proteins or small sequences of genetic material that they detect, and they just assume that those are from the virus without ever actually having the virus. So, in other words, nowhere in the world is there a test tube that contains only a virus of any kind of virus that exists anywhere or that's said to exist. This just is not available. Now, you can go to a lab company and buy an alleged virus, but it's not actually a virus in the vial that you buy. It is the fluid from a cell culture that was poisoned with a bunch of chemicals. And that's what's said to be a virus, but there's no picture or any kind of analysis or data demonstrating that there's actually a virus here. So it's essentially a big smokescreen that they pretend that these things exist, but there's no actual proof, there's no actual images or anything else demonstrating that there is such a particle of a virus or that it can do the things that they say a virus does, which is to replicate itself or reproduce itself in a host cell.
So the reasoning that everyone clearly accepts this paradigm or this ideology is because sickness and the spread and people in close proximity getting sick at the same time. So it must be this invisible particle that they can see later on after illness and sickness and poison has occurred over and over again within a cell, and then the cell breaks down, and then these particles, because there's some type of particle that they can look at, but it's not ever been isolated. That's what I'm gathering, right?
Well, there are all kinds of particles you can look at. Like it's widely known that if you look at damaged tissue, and this can be damaged tissue that you take out of an organism, or it could be in a cell culture in the laboratory and damaged during an experiment, you'll always find a variety of particles, subcellular particles. And in fact, if you learn basic biology in high school, you learn about exocytosis, right? Exocytosis is where basically a small portion of a cell membrane invaginates and creates a particle that then, goes outside of the cell. So these things are observed in natural destruction of tissue like necrosis and apoptosis, which are basically ways that our bodies can break down when faced with some kind of insult. And so it's a ubiquitous part of when you have damaged tissue and cells, you're going to see a variety of particles. But depending on the experiment that's done, they have different names for these particles. So they could take the same particle in one experiment and call it a virus, and in another experiment call it an exosome. In fact, they did this in at least one study where they had people who were allegedly HIV positive, and they found particles in their blood, and they called them exosomes. And they were actually, so in other words, they were saying that these particles come from the person's own cells. They're not a virus particle. They're not from the outside. And they were able to actually physically separate these from the blood and do experiments on them and determine what they're made of and such. But at the same time, they said that those people had HIV virus particles also in their blood. But they didn't even attempt to do those procedures with those particles. And in fact, those procedures are never done with virus particles, but they are done with other kinds of particles. And this doesn't really make any sense because they have the techniques. If viruses really exist, it would be very straightforward to separate them out of biological tissue and demonstrate their existence. But when they tried this back in the 40s and 50s, they were never able to be successful, and so they stopped doing it. But they do the proper experiments for other types of particles, as I pointed out. So we can see there's a big gap here, and why wouldn't they actually do that? The only reason that one could really fathom is because there are no virus particles to separate.
I see. So they have standards of science to measure and show and prove that something is there for everything else, for bacteria, for fungi, for parasites, for all the other microbes that could be potentially in an environment that can generate not the best health outcomes. But when it comes to viruses, there's a huge gap in this system, is what it sounds like. And I know this is high level conversation that a lot of people, it might go over their heads. But the reality is our illnesses, our wellness, I should say, that's really what it boils down to, because we focus on wellness and health. Illness and recovery processes, they happen. They are inevitable in many instances. But how these things are happening, it's important for us to recognize it. And if there are gaps in the knowledge base and the gaps in logic, really, we have to explore those gaps, and we have to make sure that we understand that there's other ways that we can build upon our health. And if we're the foundation of what we're looking to do to improve, that foundation is flawed, then we have to find a better foundation to work off of, which I think is really where the terrain perspective is and why it's valuable. And yeah.
I think a way that's much more approachable for most people to look at this issue is to look at contagion, because we are taught that we can spread illness. In fact, all the COVID lockdown policies were really about contagion. And it turns out that there are quite a number of scientific studies with placebos where they have tried to demonstrate contagion. And there's over 100 studies just on colds and flu, for example, and these are all described and analyzed in a book by Daniel Roides called Can You Catch a Cold? That's widely available. And so that's something you can look at. You basically have healthy people and you put them in close proximity to people who are having a cold or the flu, and then you see if they transfer that illness to the healthy people. And those kinds of experiments, and many variations of them, have been done over the last 200 years, and none of them have been able to demonstrate that contagion is a real phenomenon.
It's absolutely insane that the studies can't show how this phenomenon that we all accepted across the planet is real. But the reality of people getting sick is usually the base of what people are experiencing is what their reality is. The explanation is like, oh, I really don't care. I just want to get better. I just want to be safe, right? This is where people are standing, but it's
Important, but how are you going to help yourself get better if you don't understand what's causing the problem?
exactly, exactly, and that's to the next point. There's so many different variables, right? We got glyphosate, which is a big one at this point, microplastics, non-native EMFs, ultra processed foods, mRNA injections, the childhood immunization recommendations, but ultra processed foods and fear. I don't know, man. And faulty genetics is another one. But I don't know if I buy into faulty genetics in the way that they sell it to us. However, I can possibly see a contribution over terrible foods over years and how that can impact, generations down the line. But what do you think are some of the biggest culprits in the degradation of the health in our nation?
Well, I've looked at this from multiple different angles to try and make these determinations, and you definitely make a lot of good points. But I think a great starting point is that if we look back at hunter-gatherer societies in North and South America before colonial influence, and there's a lot of anthropological data and medical anthropology on this because people went to study these cultures and they brought medical personnel to look at health outcomes as one of the main areas of study. And we can see that these people living, a natural life on the land before agriculture, before the Industrial Revolution, I mean, they were able to have their own gardens and do some planting, but it was not mass agriculture. In these communities, they essentially had no illness. So they had no infectious disease. They had no tuberculosis, yellow fever, or other things that were plaguing developed countries at the time in the West. They had no diabetes, no cancer, no childhood mortality, no birth defects. And if we look at those societies compared to now, we could say that there hasn't been any major genetic changes in that time frame, if those things are, really a thing, because, according to all the theory of evolutionary genetics and such, mutations happen at a very slow rate. So it's impossible that all of these modern illnesses came, from genetic mutations that out of the blue. So if we look at what has changed in those, or what's different between those societies at the time, it really happens down to various aspects of lifestyle. Like we know that hygiene, for example, made a big difference because when societies began to urbanize and were overcrowded and didn't have sewage systems, you had some situations where you had 100 people sharing a bathroom, and you can imagine that there was fecal matter and urine all over the place, and those are things that our body's trying to get rid of. So once that was cleaned up, you saw major reductions in a lot of the so-called infectious diseases. Many of the things that there are vaccines for, they went away before the vaccines as a result of changing conditions in society. And then we can look at the industrial chemical industry, because there are some estimates that we may be exposed to somewhere around 1 million or more different man-made chemicals on a daily basis. and they come to us, from every angle, and they've been found in people's bodies in many, many studies, and not just in one part of the body, but in everywhere, essentially. So there's a lot of work on the blood. In fact, the EPA has a ongoing surveillance system, and they demonstrate all sorts of industrial chemicals in our blood, and these things, some of them are known to be toxic, and some of them haven't really been studied at all. We can find them in the fat tissue, especially in large quantities, and even things that are passed off as food, such as seed oils, talking about, canola oil and corn oil, soybean oil, things like that. Those were originally waste products and developed as machine lubricants, not as food, until really the invention of Crisco, where they took cottonseed oil, which was very toxic, and made it into something that now they called food. And those seed oils can stay in our body fat for many, many years, as well as these other industrial chemicals that are not passed off as food. But even in the reproductive organs, in the follicular fluid that bathes the eggs in the mother, they find these chemicals. They find them in semen. They find them in our outbreath. So these are pervasive, and there is very little scientific inquiry into this, because the field of toxicology, which would study the effect of these chemicals on the body, it really only looks at acute poisonings. So if you, for example, were given a large amount of one of these chemicals, they study that, and they know how much will kill you and what kind of major damage would occur. But they never look at low levels of chronic toxicity, where you're exposed to small amounts, too small to cause an acute reaction, but over time, the cumulative exposure would be equivalent to an acute poisoning situation. But not only are we exposed to just one compound in this way, we're exposed to thousands. And these things, as you said, come in food, as ultra-processed food. And, pretty much any food that you're not making at home is going to be ultra-processed and have a lot of these ingredients. I think, there's like 80 ingredients in a Big Mac, for example. So it's not just beef and cheese and wheat and for the bun. And they come from, air pollution, from things we put on our skin, from hygiene products. It's really pervasive. And what I have found in my natural healing experience and study is that when people support their body to get rid of these substances, that's when they have improvements in their health.
It's got to be the key. And thousands of petrochemicals, cumulative, all in your body over a long period of time. Nobody looks into this data. That research hasn't really been done. It's only acute poisonings, like the guy that sued Monsanto for skin cancer from the glyphosate, which they're now trying to give immunity to, which is crazy. But the buildup.
In the European Union, because of its propensity to result in cancer. It's interesting that in the United States, they have the exact opposite policy, and for anyone with eyes to see, you could tell that the government is intentionally exposing us to this poison without regard for the health effects. It's all about big agribusiness.
Economics over your health. They care about the dollar. They don't care about your wellness. And it's very clear. Talking about food security, talking about national security, to poison people. Just, y'all can't sit here and accept this. I won't. I hope the listeners across the world, Harlem and beyond, recognize that there's wild, crazy things happening. And we are in a unique position that it forces us that we have to take our health into our own hands. And Dr. Andy Kaufman is one of those doctors that was part of the system, saw the flaws in the system, decided to step outside of that nonsense and not perpetuate more poison, more death to the people, and provide more solutions and different insight and perspective for us to be able to take our health into our own hands. And for that, I am very, very grateful. And I'm mad that this hour has gone by so fast. And I wish that we can have some more time. I'm hoping I can reschedule on here. Would you be willing to come back on to talk about some more topics at a later date?
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe I can even figure out a way to get in the studio with you.
Now that would be special. And matter of fact, if we can do that, I'm going to set up an event around your coming down here because I am big on hosting in person gatherings and having community engagement. And in particular, April 11th, we're having a celebration for 10 years of business of the People's Herbalist. Has been around for 10 years officially this year. And April 11th, we'll be doing an event in Ridgefield, New Jersey at a space called Hemp and Honey. So that's going to be a really fun engagement for the community. It's totally free. We're going to have the people out there. We'll give samples and taste tests and because I make a bunch of different items from herbal hot sauces to herbal mocktails to herbal cream honeys and all kinds of fun, delicious ways to indulge in adaptogenic herbs. And then I also got my friends that are going to come out here and drop some items for people to taste as well. So, April 11th, if you are free, you are more than welcome to attend. Dr. Andy, I would love to have you out here. And if we can get you down in any date in the future, maybe in the late summer, maybe fall time to come in the station, that would be awesome too. But man, do you have any? You know what? We went through a lot today, and we barely scratched the surface. But for we got to always leave on a positive note. What do you give people for the solutions for them that they can do at home? Let's say we got a bunch of people in Harlem now. They're in an apartment building. They may not have access to the beach, but what can they do in order to simply and low cost ways to improve their health and well being?
Well, I'd say that really all you need are simple and low cost ways. The most expensive thing is better quality food that you would really need. And I really resonate with your last comment. And my really motto is to be your own health authority. So on my website, you can find educational workshops where I teach you how to deal with health problems, what's causing them, how to live a cleaner lifestyle, and even how to handle medical emergencies without involving the hospital where they would pressure you to get tetanus shots and take antibiotics and such. But you can actually safely help your body heal very easily at home. So, and a lot of what I teach is for free. So please, consider going on my website and taking advantage of some of those resources.
Drop the website for them. Drop the website for them, Dr. Kaufman.
That's andrewkaufmanmd.com.
AndrewKaufmanMD.com. Y'all heard it. Go check out there, get some free resources. Our goal, our mission, our purpose is to help the people take care of themselves, take your health into your own hands, protect your family, reconnect with nature, and please do not let the stress and negativity of the world impact you on a day to day basis. Go shine, be bright. Dr. Andy, I appreciate you for coming on with me again. And for the people, y'all have a great day, a great Wednesday, a great rest of your week. And I'm signing out on the People's Healing Hour on WHCR 90.3 FM radio, the voice of Harlem. Ah. Oh, oops. Dr. Kaufman, you still there? Oh, damn. Thank you so much, Dr. Larry Podlevsky, for your steadfastness in sharing adequate information about vaccines, about pediatric care, of truly being dedicated to science and the truth for the folks. Oh, man, this is your host, Danny Perot, the People's Herbalist. I got to tell you guys, honor your roots, protect your peace, ask questions,
All right.
and let nature guide you home. Until next
Awesome
time,
day.
have a great day.
Man, that was dope to speak with Dr. Andrew Kaufman, MD, on the People's Healing Now on WHCR 90.3 FM radio. I appreciate y'all time. I'll holler at y'all later.